Hello everybody, I'm Corey Ertz. I'm a writer for Historyscapes.com and I'm also the head tailor for Ages and Eras Historical Wares. For our August issue of Historyscapes.com, I wrote an article entitled A Generic Confederate Shell Jacket. For all the details of that jacket and for historical examples and why I made it, you can read the article. However, today I would like to go over the actual construction details of this jacket. If you've ever studied Civil War uniforms, you quickly realize that the Confederate uniforms were anything but uniform. However, as time went on, they developed a common theme. On the left-hand side of the screen, you see two jackets. The longer jacket, of course, is an officer's jacket with all the gold braid. But the other jacket, being used by an officer, is a North Carolina depot jacket. You'll note that it is hip length and it has full sleeves, it buttons up the front, and it has a standing collar. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see a Columbus steeple jacket. Columbus steeple jackets were hip length, they buttoned up the front, they had full sleeves, and they had that standing collar. Another issue jacket that was made in large number were the Richmond type jackets. This is a Richmond Depot Type 2 shell jacket, and as you can see, it is hip or waist length. It has full sleeves, and it buttons up the front, and it has that standing collar. Now, Richmond Depot Type 2 jackets also had shoulder straps and belt loops, but for whatever reason, these items proved unpopular with soldiers who would often remove them in the field. My jacket is not an issued jacket. However, it is made out of issued fabric. The reason for this was that during the Civil War, sometimes Confederate soldiers could draw fabric from the depot, or they could purchase fabric from the depot and have a private tailor make their jacket. Because of this, my jacket features civilian style one-piece sleeves like on the Columbus Depot jackets. It still buttons up the front, it is hip length, but it has a lower standing collar than on other Confederate jackets. Once the soldier got his fabric, he could turn it over to a tailor who would cut out the jacket. Here we see the basic parts. We also see the shoulder strap and the belt loop, which I would eliminate. On the right side of the screen, you see the start of the construction. The sleeve pieces are sewn together at the wrist. Here you see the construction process. I hand sewed the sleeves together at the wrist, opened up the seam, and then flat felled it, or just basically whip stitched it in place to keep it from moving. Then I sewed the long sleeve seam together, opened it up, and again flat felled it so that it would stay in place. This is what the sleeve looked like when it's complete and when it's turned right sides out. You'll note that the outside fabric is a wool, although the Confederate government actually issued multiple types of fabric. This is a nice wool, and the lining for the sleeves is a common pillow ticking. On the left side of the screen, you'll see the cut of the collar and how it is sewn together like the sleeves and flat felled on the open seam. And here is more detailed work of the collar. You'll note that the collar is made up of 4 pieces of wool and 2 pieces of the pillow ticking lining. The lining acts as an interfacing. And what I've done here is sewed the pieces together correctly and then flat felled all the seams so that they would stay in place. On the left side of your screen, you'll see one of the 2 belt loops that originally I was planning on putting on. However, after understanding that they were a rather unpopular feature on these jackets, I decided to omit it. Here we have the back pieces. And you'll note that at first it looks like I oversized the side backs because they're a lot longer on that curved section than the back part is. But the odd thing about a lot of Civil War clothing is the pieces were actually cut like this, and you have to what's called ease them together. That is, as you sew them, you actually have to pull part of the fabric on the one side while compressing the other fabric. Then the seam is clipped and then pressed flat and eventually flat felled with the sewing like on the other pieces. Okay, here are the body pieces, the backs, awaiting flat felling. Now you'll note on the left-hand side is the outer shell or the wool, and you'll see how at those side seams, on those curved seams, how it's eased together. The shorter pieces of fabric are stretched and the longer pieces of fabric are condensed. You'll also note the bottom edge, how it comes to that point. This was a common feature on shell jackets, so I went with it. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the lining. Now on this, I went with Ozenberg. The reason for this is Ozenberg was the most popular lining used in Southern industry. In fact, the Richmond Depot used it almost exclusively to all of their fabrics. Here's the front lining pieces, and on that front lining is a wool facing. It is sewn, flipped, and then eventually top stitched in place. And here's the pocket setting. Most jackets back then had at least one inside pocket, including those from the Richmond Depot, so I decided to go with it. I made the pocket bag out of that pillow ticking, and these are actually quite a bit of work. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see where I top stitched or stitched through in place using a running stitch or a back stitch, and then on the right-hand side of the screen is a close-up of that stitching. After the pocket bag is stitched in place, I cut through the whole fabric. You'll see that slot there, it's cut straight through, and then it is pulled through to the back side. It's pulled through that hole and then pressed out. And this is what it looks like on the left-hand side of the screen, how it's hanging there. And also note on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see the back side of that running stitch that sewed the facing to the lining. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see what the outside or right side of those lining pieces look like. The pocket is on the back side, and on the front side everything is pressed smooth, and it actually looks pretty good. On the right hand side of the screen, you can see the pocket bag, how it hangs, and how I took a running stitch and went around the outside of it. Here's the pocket. It's nearly finished. You can see the line of top stitching on the bottom edge, and on both sides of the slit there's a buttonhole stitch, and there will eventually be a line of top stitching above the pocket as well. On the left hand side of the screen, you can see where a reinforcing piece or a stiffening piece called interfacing is being added. I used the same pillow ticking that I used in the sleeve and the pocket bag for the interfacing. With the interfacing in place, I stitched around the entire edge and then flipped it right sides out and then pressed it open. You can see how it's nice and neatly pressed, how it lays flat, and then you can also see the raw edge around the neck opening. This will be folded over and stitched in place, and then it'll be time to put the sleeves on. On the right hand side of your screen, you can see where I am lining up the sleeve seam with the two seams on the back side at the shoulder hole. This was in between those two seams. Now the sleeves are cut with a larger circumference than the armholes, which means when you put the sleeves on, you have to ease that fabric into place. It's not a big deal with jean cloth or with this nice wool, but when it's time to do the lining, it gets a little complicated. You have to ease the pillow ticking into the Ozenberg. To do this, I actually stretch the Ozenberg by putting pressure on the pillow ticking. It forms these little tents or dimples, which I flatten out with my stitching. You'll notice that's a nice tight whip stitch around the edge of the sleeve opening. Almost done. Here's the jacket, and it's awaiting the buttonholes and the top stitching. You'll notice it's got the characteristics of the Richmond Depot jacket, but yet with its one-piece sleeves and that lower collar, it's actually a little different. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see where I added the running stitch for the top stitching and where I've started to put the buttonholes into place. With the buttons in place, the jacket is done. Now, if you'd like to know more about why I chose the cut that I chose, or the fabric, or the buttons, you can read up on it in a Generic Confederate Reenactors jacket published this August 2021 in Historyscapes. In that article, I also have links to a lot of the references that I used and a lot of the sources that I read. Thank you so much for watching. Historyscapes is an ages and eras periodical and provides honest, educational, and entertaining history in a fact-based way involving well-researched articles, on-site videos, biographies, interviews, as well as do-it-yourself and living history projects. Thank you so much for watching.